Welcome to this video. Here, we will learn how to use RDS to spin up a remote MySQL database on AWS. RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and it is a great way to spin up a managed database on AWS. As I mentioned, we will be using MySQL as our database engine. MySQL is just an outstanding database for many reasons. It is highly performant and it is comparatively cheap up against some of the other popular databases, and it really is just the perfect fit for our specific use case. So let's dive in. All right, so let's go ahead and go to RDS. And there's a nice orange button here for us to create our database. As I mentioned, we will be using the MySQL engine. There are a number of other options, but again, MySQL is really just the perfect fit for this use case and just an excellent database overall. We're going to be using the free tier. So this instance will be free for the next 12 months, and then after that point, our credit card would be charged. If this were truly a production application, I would obviously choose production, but we're dealing with a pretty small amount of data. This is not a real business application, and I really just want to do whatever I can to help keep costs low for people who are running this tutorial. So again, for our use cases, free tier should be good enough, and since this is really a toy application, it's based on pretty challenging data, as you'll see, and we're really going to ramp this up as a production application, but we don't have anybody who is going to complain if our queries are running slow. This isn't a real business. So free tier should be acceptable in this case. All right, so for my DB instance identifier, this is what's going to appear on AWS. I am going to call this churn database. Really out of convention, I'm going to call my master username root rather than admin. And here I'm going to create a good password. So this is an important database. We want to make sure that we have a nice strong password for it. So something that's going to be above 11, 12 characters, that's going to have a mix of cases, that's going to have a mix of different characters, that's going to have a special character in it, at least one special character, and some numbers in it as well to make it hard to crack. So I'm going to enter in a nice password here. And moving on, so for DB instance size, we really don't have a choice here. This is what AWS gives us for free. It's a small database, only 1 vCPU, 1 gigabyte of RAM. So, if we were dealing with a lot of data, we may run into issues here. But as you've seen, our data set only has about 210,000 records in it. That's really not that big. I think there's, under 30 columns as well. So again, not dealing with huge data here by any means. We will be using MySQL to log some payloads coming in and going out of our production application, and really we're not going to spend too much time doing that. So it's not like we're going to be running tests over the course of several days and racking up hundreds of thousands or millions of payloads. We're only going to do a handful of use cases. So we will be adding to the size of our data, but not by too terribly much. So again, this really should be good enough for our use cases. For storage, we're just going to leave that all at the default. For connectivity, we're just going to go ahead and launch this in the default VPC. We've not talked a ton about VPCs, but just leaving it in the default should be fine for now. There are some items we do want to change in additional connectivity and configuration. We do want this to be publicly accessible. This will allow us to connect from our laptop. We also want to create a new security group, and I am going to call this MySQL. So if you're not familiar with a security group, basically that defines a set of inbound and outbound rules for this instance or a different type of instance that we're using in AWS if this were EC2 or something along those lines. But we're defining a new security group for MySQL, and by default, this will allow MySQL traffic from my IP address. So this is kind of a nice little thing about RDS. If you create a new security group here, it's going to say, all right, coming from my IP address, I'm going to allow any MySQL traffic. However, if I were to go to the coffee shop north of my house and try to connect to the database, I'm not going to be able to do that because my IP address is going to be different. So this is a really important security protocol because I now will only allow the IP addresses that I trust to connect to my database. It is also a good idea to have pretty specific security groups. So, later on we may spin up an EC2 instance, and let's say we have 3 other people who want to access that. And for MySQL, only I want to access that. So, the security rules very viably could be different. And so we would want to have a different security group for MySQL than for EC2 because EC2 may need broader access to a larger set of folks. So it is a little bit more effort, but it is worth it from a security standpoint to create these more bespoke security groups. All right, moving on. Yep, we're going to do password authentication. And again, this is a free tier product. So for the first 12 months, we are not going to pay anything. I'm going to click Create Database. And it tells me this may take a few minutes, and that is correct. Typically, this will only take about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and then once this database is up and ready, we're going to do a sample connect to it and finish out this section.